How many times have you found yourself saying that you have failed once again, that you simply are not good enough? How many times do we look at our own steps with shame, as if we are always stumbling, even when we try with all our might to move forward? And the worst part, we believe it. We deeply believe that we are incapable, that something in us is broken, defective, doomed to repeat the same mistakes. But is that true? Are we really failing, or are we sabotaging ourselves without even realizing it? Carl Jung, the psychiatrist who dared to explore the darkest corners of the human mind, gave us a disturbing answer. What we call failure often turns out to be nothing more than an unconscious theater. A silent and hidden movement of parts of ourselves that operate in the shadows, parts that, despite seeming like enemies, are trying to protect us. Not protect in the noble sense of the word, but protect out of fear. Protect like a dog that bites before being attacked. Protect by keeping us small, invisible, comfortable. Because growing hurts. Because changing, standing out, taking up space, taking risks. All of this can be interpreted within our psyche as a threat. And here lies the most frightening point. These parts that sabotage us are not external. They are not our parents, our friends, our bosses, or society. They are aspects of ourselves. Internal voices that have been shaped throughout our lives in experiences that we may not even remember. Moments of rejection, shame, criticism, fear. Fragments from childhood, adolescence, silent traumas, expectations we couldn't meet. These voices still live within us, like hidden advisors that say, "Don't go. This is dangerous. They will laugh at you. You will fail again." And without realizing it, we start to act according to these commands. We begin to create delays, forget commitments, miss deadlines, enter relationships that sabotage us, or give up just when we are about to succeed. But why do we do this? Why do we betray ourselves in the most crucial moments? Jung believed that the human psyche is formed by an internal committee, an assembly of parts, some conscious, others completely unconscious. And not all of them want our evolution. Some prefer to keep things as they are, because change threatens the identity we have built to survive in the world. For these parts, success can mean exposure, growth can mean loneliness, shining can mean being hated, and so they pull us back, like invisible anchors that operate through self-sabotage. We are not talking here about simple laziness or lack of focus. We are talking about a silent war waged within us, a war between what we aspire to become and what we have learned to be in order to feel safe. A battle between the expansion of consciousness and the regressive force of the shadow. And if we want to win this war, or better yet, transform it into reconciliation, we need to stop viewing our sabotaging behaviors as character flaws. We need to start seeing them as messages, as alerts, as symptoms of something much deeper happening in our psyche. Jung shows us that the way out is not to repress these parts, nor to pretend they don't exist. The way out is to listen to them. It is to understand what they fear. It is to dialogue with our internal saboteur, as one would talk to a wounded child who has only learned to protect itself by creating chaos. And that is exactly what we will explore in the next part. Who is this internal saboteur? How does it form? How does it act? And why, even with the best intentions, is it capable of destroying everything we have built? There is a part of us that does not appear in photos, that is not mentioned in conversations, and that many times we cannot even name. A silent, invisible part, but one that is present in almost all of our decisions, especially in those we cannot explain. Carl Jung called this part the shadow, and it is here that our internal saboteur resides. The shadow is not a poetic metaphor. It is real. It is an autonomous psychic system that carries everything we have been taught to repress, deny, or hide. It houses our fears, impulses, traumas, insecurities, painful memories, unacceptable desires, feelings of inadequacy. Everything that does not fit into the social image we have constructed of ourselves goes there. From a young age, we learn what is acceptable and what must be hidden. Don't cry. That's weakness. Don't complain. Be grateful. Don't think too highly of yourself. That's arrogance. And so we adjust. We build an acceptable self and, without realizing it, push entire parts of our psyche into the basement of the unconscious. But what is repressed does not disappear. On the contrary, it strengthens. It gains a life of its own. And that is where the danger lies. Because the shadow is not just a passive repository. It acts, it observes, it learns the language of our fears and begins to manipulate our lives from behind the curtains. When we are about to make a decision that would take us to a new level, a healthier relationship, a career opportunity, a life change, it is the shadow that whispers, "This is not for you. You will fail. You don't deserve it." And the worst part is that it expresses itself in our own inner voice. It speaks as if it were us. Jung warned us. The shadow is not malignant. It is primitive. It acts based on a single principle: survival. And for it, growth is a risk. Growth means stepping out of the known, facing the judgment of others, challenging old patterns. The shadow has learned that it is safer to stay small, invisible, complacent. That is why it activates sabotaging behaviors whenever it senses we are leaving the safety zone. Sometimes it paralyzes us with anxiety. Other times, it hands us over to chronic procrastination. And there are moments when it creates conflicts, ends relationships, implodes everything, just to bring us back to the state where it feels in control. If we observe ourselves honestly, we will see the traces of the shadow everywhere. In the decisions we postpone for no apparent reason, in the projects we abandon halfway, in the opportunities we let slip by, in the toxic patterns we repeat, even swearing that this time will be different. Each of these movements is often a clear sign that the internal saboteur has taken command. But here is the most important part. The shadow only has power over us when it remains unconscious. This is what Jung meant when he said that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When we do not see this force within us, we come to believe that we are victims of luck, misfortune, the world, or ourselves. But when we recognize the existence of the saboteur, we begin to understand that it is, in fact, a forgotten part of us, crying out for integration. However, recognizing is not enough. We need to understand what exactly this part fears. Why does it associate our success with pain, rejection, abandonment? What experiences shape this belief? What unconscious narratives fuel the sabotage? And that is exactly what we will explore in the next part. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. It is hard to accept, but there is a cruel paradox within us. A part of our psyche, while desiring evolution, is terrified of transformation. It wants us to be happy, but deeply fears the price that may come with it. It wants us to be successful, but believes that success means exposure, judgment, loneliness, or even abandonment. And that is why often, at the exact moment we're about to cross a door that could lead us to a new level, something pulls us back. This regressive force, this invisible lock, is our unconscious attempt at protection. A protection against the risk of growth. According to Jung, this mechanism arises from deeply impactful emotional experiences that are recorded in the psyche as existential threats. We are not talking about logical and conscious memories, but about emotional impressions, often formed in childhood, that create lasting associations between change and pain. Imagine, for example, a child who learned that whenever they tried to stand out, they were criticized. Whenever they expressed their ideas, they were ignored. Whenever they showed joy or self-confidence, someone would come and make them feel ashamed. This child grows up with an unconscious code. Being authentic is dangerous. Showing who I am attracts rejection. It's better not to draw attention. And this code continues to operate, even when we are adults, even when the context has completely changed. The issue is that our unconscious does not operate on rational logic. It operates on emotional associations. If, at some point in the past, standing out meant pain, it will continue to protect us from that at all costs. Even if today, that is exactly what we desire. Thus, whenever we are about to expose ourselves, whether starting a new project, entering a relationship, changing careers, or embracing our true identity, the unconscious triggers its alarms, and the shadow comes into play to sabotage the process, but not as an enemy, as a guardian. A wounded guardian, yes, but one that believes it is protecting us from the worst. This is the paradox. The same part that destroys us also thinks it is saving us. Sabotage is not an attack. It is a poorly calibrated attempt at protection. Our psyche has learned that the pain of rejection is worse than the pain of stagnation, that the fear of failure is more tolerable than the fear of facing others' expectations, that living half-heartedly is less risky than living fully. And so we remain trapped in cycles, dreaming big, but walking in circles, starting, but never finishing, wanting, but always finding invisible justifications to postpone. And there is something even deeper here. This sabotaging part has no name. It is a hidden fragment of our identity, formed by layers of pain, shame, fear, and conditioning. It does not want to see us unhappy. It wants to keep us safe. And that is exactly why fighting against it does not work. Every time we try to defeat the saboteur with willpower, we end up reinforcing the resistance. Because for the shadow, being defeated is the same as being hurt again. The true way out is not war, it is dialogue. And that is where Jung offers us a powerful key: active imagination. A therapeutic technique where, instead of repressing the shadow, we sit face to face with it. We listen, we observe its messages, we give language to what was once just a symptom. When we do this, something changes. The shadow ceases to be an enemy and begins to reveal its purpose. It starts to collaborate. It begins, finally, to integrate. But before reaching integration, we need to recognize the symptoms. We need to learn to identify how, when, and why the shadow comes into action. We need to decipher the codes of self-sabotage in our daily lives, from the limiting thoughts to the seemingly irrational behaviors that take us away from our goals. Prepare to see procrastination, self-criticism, repetitive dramas with new eyes, and realize that what seemed like bad luck or lack of discipline may just be the shadow whispering behind every decision. Self-sabotage doesn't usually shout. It whispers. It doesn't show up with signs saying, "Stop here." It operates from the edges, through patterns so subtle and repetitive that over time, we begin to confuse them with our personality. But it's not. It's the shadow at work. And the scariest part is that, often, it acts precisely when everything is going well. When we start to gain momentum. When we finally feel ready to take the next step. Let's be honest. How many times have we been one step away from something important and simply stopped? We make excuses. We forget. We procrastinate. The famous, "I'll deal with it later," that never comes. And this doesn't happen by chance. The shadow acts exactly in those moments. And its favorite weapon is subtlety. The unexplainable procrastination. The fatigue that appears out of nowhere. The doubt that arises the day before a decision. The anxiety that keeps us awake before a presentation. The sudden urge to change everything at the last minute. The impulse to argue with someone close just when we're about to do something important. Coincidence? No. It's sabotage, disguised as a rational justification. These behaviors, although they seem random, follow a pattern, and if we start to observe them closely, we'll notice that they arise whenever we touch on some internal boundary, an invisible limit, where our comfort zone ends and the territory of change begins. It's at this exact point that the shadow rises. It cannot stand the idea of expansion, because expansion is synonymous with risk, and risk to it equals pain. So it does what it knows best, sabotages invisibly but effectively. One of the most powerful mechanisms of self-sabotage is negative self-talk. That voice that demotivates us even before we try. That makes us believe we're not good enough, that everyone else does it better, that no one will care, that we'll fail again. This voice is not the truth. It is the echo of old experiences that still live within us. Echoes of rejections, criticisms, humiliations that were not integrated. And every time it appears, it pushes us back to the known. It keeps us grounded, even when we have wings ready to fly. Another subtle symptom is what we can call strategic self-destruction. Those seemingly silly choices we make, but that deep down sabotage important opportunities, like staying up late the night before an event, forgetting to respond to that crucial email, accepting an invitation just to avoid an important task, or even getting into pointless arguments at critical moments. This isn't bad luck. It's not a lack of organization. It's an unconscious system acting masterfully to keep us exactly where we are. And perhaps the most dramatic of all, the habit of creating conflicts when everything is going too well. Have you noticed how sometimes when peace begins to settle in, something inside us seems disturbed? As if we're not prepared for balance. As if tranquility bothers us more than chaos. And then, out of nowhere, we start a fight. We create a problem. We provoke a misunderstanding. It's the saboteur saying, "Don't trust this, don't relax, it will end." Because in the past, it may have ended. And now we carry this pattern as protection. A protection that destroys. All of this doesn't happen because we are weak. It happens because our psyche is still conditioned to associate success with pain, achievement with pressure, peace with abandonment. The shadow has learned that succeeding is dangerous, and until we bring this to the light of consciousness, it will continue pulling the strings behind the scenes. But there is a way out. There is a way to stop dancing to the rhythm of this invisible music. And the first step is to look at the shadow with different eyes, to stop treating it as an enemy, to start listening to it, to understand what it wants to say, what it needs, what it fears. In the next part, we will explore exactly this. We will understand why dialoguing with the saboteur is much more effective than trying to suppress it. Most of us spend our lives trying to rid ourselves of what hinders us. We reject our insecurities, hide our fears, fight our vices, and pretend that certain emotions don't even exist. We think that the path to evolution lies in overcoming these dark aspects. But Carl Jung proposed something radically different, and for many, deeply uncomfortable. What if, instead of fighting the shadow, we talk to it? Jung understood the shadow not as an internal demon that needed to be exorcised, but as a living and legitimate part of the human psyche. A part that has been excluded, ignored, ridiculed, or punished, and thus became reactive. The shadow is formed by everything that did not fit into the idealized image of who we should be. And the more we deny its existence, the more autonomy it gains. It begins to act without our permission, to influence our decisions, to sabotage our relationships, our projects, our dreams. Not out of malice, but because it has been trained to believe it is protecting us. That is why Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. True transformation happens when we stop hiding from ourselves, when we have the courage to look into the eyes of the part we reject and ask, "What do you want from me?" This is the beginning of integration. It is not about erasing the shadow, but recognizing its existence, listening to its voice, understanding its logic. Only then can we reclaim the energy it has imprisoned and redirect it towards something constructive. One of the most powerful tools proposed by Jung for this process is active imagination. Unlike traditional meditation, where we seek to empty the mind, active imagination invites us to dive into the chaos of the unconscious. The technique consists of entering a state of receptivity and allowing images, voices, characters, or symbols to arise spontaneously, as in dreams, and then consciously interacting with them. Not as an observer, but as a participant, as someone who converses with their own shadow. This symbolic dialogue allows us to finally give form to what haunts us. The shadow ceases to be a chaotic force and becomes an internal interlocutor. We can, for example, imagine that we are face to face with that part of us that procrastinates, sabotages relationships, explodes with anger, or shrinks in fear. And by interacting with it, we discover that its motivation, most of the time, is legitimate. It wants to keep us safe. It just continues to operate with the parameters of the past. It still sees us as that vulnerable, unprepared, frightened child. And it is in this moment of deep listening that a new relationship can begin to form, a relationship of integration, no longer of war. The integration of the shadow, as Jung understood, is a slow, deep, and often painful process. It requires courage to see in ourselves what we most hate in others. It requires maturity to recognize that our greatest internal enemies only exist because they have been left alone for too long. But above all, it requires responsibility, because once we see, we can no longer pretend we didn't. Once we listen, we can no longer silence it forcefully. By integrating the shadow, we regain vitality. Many people report, after this process, a profound sense of relief, as if they had stopped carrying an invisible weight. Others discover talents, desires, and potentials that were buried by repression. And most importantly, the cycle of self-sabotage begins to unravel. Because now, that part that once pulled us back starts to walk alongside us. But the work doesn't stop there. After integrating the shadow, a new question arises. What to do with all this energy that was once used to sabotage us? How can we transform fear into fuel, pain into learning, insecurity into creative impulse? This is what we will explore in the next part. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Few people realize this, but within every destructive emotion lies an immense amount of vital energy. Anger, fear, insecurity, jealousy, shame, all these feelings we avoid and often attribute to our weakness are not, in essence, negative. They are merely raw. They are unrefined energy, pulsing within us, waiting for direction. And once we stop repressing this energy and begin to understand it, we can redirect it with an almost explosive power. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Where there is fear, there is power." You see, everything that sabotages us has, behind it, a distorted positive intention. Procrastination, for example, may just be a symptom of an unconscious fear of failure, or of succeeding and not being able to meet expectations. Perfectionism can be an attempt to protect oneself from criticism. Chronic indecision, an unconscious way to avoid rejection. And all these internal strategies, despite limiting us, have something in common. They try to protect us from a pain we have felt before. And that is why, if we can transform this energy into awareness, it can become a creative force. But how is this possible in practice? The answer lies in integration. When we do the work of looking at the shadow, listening to its motives and understanding its roots, something extraordinary happens. The energy that was once used to sabotage us reorganizes. We begin to recognize the emotional patterns that paralyzed us, no longer as external obstacles or internal failures, but as psychic scripts that can be rewritten. And this act of rewriting, of redirecting, is the turning point. For example, anger, when understood, can transform into assertiveness. Fear can become intelligent caution. Shame can turn into sensitivity. Insecurity can evolve into genuine humility. What was once experienced as weakness becomes wisdom. Because contrary to what we have been taught, it is not by ignoring our emotions that we become strong. It is by using them with awareness. And it is at this moment that we begin to realize something essential. The internal saboteur was not our enemy. It was a messenger. It was crying out for attention. And the more we ignored it, the more it sabotaged. But now that we have listened, that we understand, that we have created an internal space for this part to manifest with dignity, it can reorganize. It can, for the first time, work in our favor. Think about this. What if that part that always destroyed your opportunities is exactly the part with the greatest capacity to build them? What if the fear that paralyzes you is the same that, when redirected, can make you move forward with a courage you have never experienced? What if the emotional exhaustion you have felt for years is just the result of fighting against yourself, and that now, with the forces aligned, this exhaustion can give way to a new kind of vitality? Jung saw this as the essence of the individuation process. The moment we stop being fragments fighting against each other and start operating as an integrated whole. It is in this state that true inner freedom emerges, because finally, we are no longer divided. There is no longer one part trying to move forward and another pulling back. We are united, whole, complete, and that changes everything. However, there is an important detail. To reach this point, we must learn to recognize when we are sabotaging ourselves, while we are sabotaging ourselves. Awareness is the antidote. And more than that, we need to develop the ability to perceive the subtle patterns of the mind in our daily lives, to understand how these impulses arise, how they distract us, how they convince us to give up on ourselves. Understanding that what we often call failure is actually a deeply rooted act of self-sabotage, an unconscious mechanism orchestrated by parts of ourselves that have been forgotten, wounded, or rejected. We are not failing due to a lack of ability. We are stuck because there are internal voices, often older than we can remember, telling us that it is safer not to change. Jung teaches us that the true obstacle is not outside. It is not the world, the system, the other. It is the silent war we wage within ourselves, the internal division between who we want to be and what we have learned we should be, the battle between our potential and the traumas that created our defenses. But the biggest mistake we can make is to keep fighting against these parts, to keep trying to silence the shadow, repress the fear, ignore the saboteur. Because the truth is that these parts will not disappear. They are part of our psychic structure. They are pieces of our history, fragments that carry not only pain, but also power. The power to protect, to alert, to transform. The key is not to defeat the saboteur. The key is to listen to it, to recognize it, to integrate it. When we do this, we stop sabotaging ourselves. We begin to orient ourselves, to walk with all our parts together, including those that previously hindered us. This is true psychological maturity, stepping out of the childish illusion that we can be only light and accepting that the shadow is an essential part of our wholeness. What separates those who realize their potential from those who remain stuck in the same place is not talent or luck. It is the ability to recognize with humility and courage when we are being dominated by unconscious parts, and the willingness to dive into this internal territory to reclaim the autonomy we gave away without realizing it. If you have made it this far, know, this is already a sign that you are ready for this work, ready to stop repeating cycles, ready to transform the fears that paralyze you into allies that propel you forward. Now, I want to invite you. Write in the comments a situation where you realized you were self-sabotaging. It can be something recent, something old. The simple act of recognition is already part of the integration process. When we verbalize, we begin to transform and continue this journey. The next video is the natural continuation of this process. It is also important. I'll see you there.